Why won't you talk to me? I've been talking to you this whole time. Can you say anything to me? Why not? Why not? Today we're going to talk about the titans of industry. Now, during class, we've kind of been talking about these kind of causes, the background causes of what is going to be this Gilded Age, this tremendous economic expansion. And now we're going to talk about the individuals. There are a couple individuals that are really noted for this era. These individuals can be referred by many names. Two of them that come up are, are they titans of industry, which obviously have a positive connotation, or are they robber barons, which have a more negative connotation that they are taking from society. So we're going to dabble in that a little bit, and what we're going to also look at, we're going to have a theme today. Our theme is going to be many business leaders sought to increase profits by consolidating corporations into large trusts, holding companies. So we're going to look at three people. Actually, we're going to look at four. One is going to be John Rockefeller, who's going to be in the oil industry, Andrew Carnegie, who's going to be in the steel industry, Cornelius Vanderbilt, who's going to be in the railroad industry, and we have a person that's kind of financing so much of this Gilded Age and this expansion of businesses, and that's going to be J.P. Morgan. He's got a little funny story, but we'll talk about him. So the very first thing that we're going to talk about is this term laissez-faire capitalism. Now, laissez-faire capitalism is a French term that means I love money. That's not what? That's not what it means? Do I have to? I have to change it. Laissez-faire capitalism in essence means hands-off capitalism. This is this notion that we're going to let the market be the way it is. We're going to have no government intervention, and so we want free trade. Now, this laissez-faire capitalism is going to come under a tremendous amount of criticism, and we're going to take a look at that as the unit goes on. Now, the very first titan of industry that we're going to look at is going to be Cornelius Vanderbilt, and they call him the Commodore. Now, Vanderbilt is going to be known for the railroads, and not only is he going to be known for the railroads, he's going to be known for railroad consolidation, and he is going to be one of the earliest figures that are going to be able to cut out some of the competition in order to run these massive railroad companies. As a matter of fact, he's going to have a monopoly in parts of the United States where if you wanted to do anything or ship anything or go anywhere, you're going to be on a Vanderbilt railroad. Probably no other individual made an equal impact over such an extended period of time on America's economy and society, referring to obviously Cornelius Vanderbilt. Over the course of his 66-year career, he stood on the forefront of change, a modernizer from beginning to end. He vastly improved and expanded the nation's transportation infrastructure, contributing to the transformation of the very geography of the United States. So this particular historian obviously is very favorable looking at someone like Cornelius Vanderbilt as this titan of industry. However, other historians can see him as something called a robber baron, and Cornelius Vanderbilt is going to be one of the first people that are going to get the tag of robber baron. The term robber baron is a negative connotation for these industrialists, and in essence means a person who became rich through these scrupulous, sometimes illegal forms of business. Vanderbilt's going to be one of those people who's going to get this tag of robber baron. Now, historians will have this competing debate. Will someone like Vanderbilt, is he a titan of industry? Is he a robber baron? Or maybe is he both? Maybe it's not black and white. All right, ladies and gentlemen, here is J.P. Morgan. J.P. Morgan is known for his finance, and he is going to be the money behind a lot of these consolidations. Now, J.P. Morgan is one of my favorites because one of the things that he was really self-conscious about is the size of his nose. He had some sort of disease where his nose actually continues to grow. And so, for instance, his photographer in 1870s, here's what he said. His nose was downright frightening. A huge, more or less deformed, sick, bulbous mass on the center of his face. And he also would be really angry because when people would stare at him, they'd stare at his nose. As a matter of fact, there are kids who were in New York who would be outside his house, to be outside his company, and they would be playing jump rope. And they would have this chant. They would say, Johnny Morgan's nasal organ has a purple hue. And so I could see these kids doing jump rope and just I'm sorry. I'm sorry. So he's going to make his money in banking. And here's the thing. These companies during this time, they don't have to release any information about their finances. So what made him unique is he worked hard to get this information about companies and even information about economic data. And, of course, he would pay for it and sometimes he wouldn't. But he had learned to use this information about the companies and information about economic data to identify the companies he wants to invest in. And this becomes more difficult because, again, it is not a rule for these companies to release any of this information, and there's no organization that is going to gather economic information. And very few people knew this information or even knew what to do with it. So this idea of macroeconomics, it's not a thing yet. Economics is, though there's this belief in free market capitalism, Adam Smith has already lived and died, but this idea of macroeconomics really is not a thing as an official form of study. And through this information, J.P. Morgan identified the railroads in particular as something that he wants to invest in, because what he determines that the railroads are overbuilt. And as a matter of fact, there were too many railroad companies. And so he kept this on the back burner and kind of waited because he knew that this competition was killing these railroads. So the Panic of 1873 is really about the things that he was worried about. The railroads are being overbuilt. And as a matter of fact, there were so many railroads that banks begin financing. They dump a ton of money in the development of the railroads. It becomes the new things. It's like the canals of the early 1800s where people are pumping money into these canals. So basically, if a railroad company were to develop and they would ask any bank for a loan, it was easy money. It was easy money. But the problem is, the Panic of 1873 is really going to be caused by this overproduction of railroads. And what happens, it's too many companies chasing too little business. And so railroads begin to slowly fail. And so as the railroads begin to fail, because they're competing too strongly with each other, there are too many people competing in the marketplace, as these companies failed, the banks that were lending them money began to fail because the loans aren't being paid back. So the banks also begin to fail. And so this depression, this Panic of 1873, is going to last nearly the entire 1870s, so all the way to 1879. So J.P. Morgan already knew this. He knew the railroads were overbuilt, and he knew the kind of economic data behind it. He's seeing these railroads beginning to fail. And so what he's able to do is get the information about these companies, and he basically begins buying up the companies, and he's eliminating this competition by buying up the companies. And so he's consolidating all of these companies around him, very much like Vanderbilt, and he uses this process with many industries. I'm just giving an example of the railroads, but he uses this process in many industries, including things like... All right, let's make a major turn. John Rockefeller, we know that he is the wealthiest person ever to walk foot on the continent. He is one of the wealthiest, one of the wealthiest people ever in the history of mankind. He is going to make his wealth in oil, and he's a very interesting person because he's really going to be known for horizontal integration. We talked about horizontal integration in the class. He's going to be known for horizontal integration, but all of his companies are actually going to be both vertically and horizontally integrated. So he's going to own all the resources, but what he's going to be well known for is he is going to consolidate the oil refining business. That's where he's going to get his... But one of the major lessons that he's going to learn when he's a kid is to save when you can, not when you have to, right? You don't save when you're in dire straits. You save when you're actually flush with money. Save when you can, not when you have to. And in that way, he can take advantage of opportunities that comes his way. So when we fast forward to when he begins to look at this oil boom that begins to develop in the United States, oil boom develops. This is going to happen in Pennsylvania, and this is actually going to last almost 50 years. And so people are flocking to dig up oil, drilling for oil, and so much money gets pumped into drilling for oil. Well, one of the things he determines is that the actual drilling is really risky. And he said it made more sense to refine the oil, turn the oil into kerosene and eventually gasoline. And so what he does is he creates Standard Oil. And Standard Oil, this is going to be in Cleveland, Ohio. Now, what he does is, remember, save when you can, not when you have to. He's hyper-focused on cost, which is a trait of all of these industrialists. Okay, so we're going to look at the price of oil and what he does to affect the price of oil. Again, his hyper-focus on cost, and then you're going to see how it's going to affect his business. So we're going to look at any competitor's oil versus his. Let's all say it starts at $1. Now, let me give you a story of basically what he does. Now, one of the things, while he was going on tour of his plant in Cleveland, he sees a guy who's soldering these kerosene cans, which basically think of it as welding. You're using solder in order to stick the top on. Well, each can had 40 drops of solder. So he goes up to the guy who's soldering the cans and he says, how many drops does it take? He said 40. And he says, why don't you try 38 drops and see if it could stay on just as tight? And he tries it and it didn't work, and it starts leaking out. Then he's like, I tell you what, do it again. Now do it with 39 drops of solder. And that time it worked. And so that one drop of solder that sealed the kerosene, he took one away, and it saved his company $2,500 in the first year. And so he does this. He has this hyper focus on cost and efficiency. And what does that do? Now his oil and kerosene are more attractive because they're cheaper. So people are going to flock to his oil. And let's look at another thing. Another place where he's going to save a ton of money is he is going to have railroads connecting from all over the country, from all these places that are drilling for oil, going right into Cleveland, right into Standard Oil. So again, he becomes the focus of refinement. Okay, not only that, he looks at the railroad industry. We talked a little bit about the railroad industry already, and we already told you that it's overbuilt and they're always looking for business. He goes up to the railroad company and he says, I will guarantee that I will purchase transportation for 60 big tankers full of oil every day, no matter what. And see, this is great. In this railroad industry that is desperately looking for work or desperately looking for business, this is fantastic. And what he does, like, if you offer me a discount, then I will ship with you no matter what. It doesn't matter if I have customers or not, I will ship with you regardless. And what happens is it goes from $2.40 a tanker for shipping to $1.65. And so what he decides to do is he tells this railroad company not to tell any of the other oil refiners. So all of the oil refiners, all the other ones, are paying the $2.40. He's paying $1.65, and he has an agreement with that railroad company not to tell anybody. And so when we go back and we start to look at the difference between the competitor's oil and his oil, he can cut it even more. And so the oil companies are at their wits' end to trying to figure out how in the world can he cut the prices so much. And again, his focus is on cost. And again, that's not something that was typical. So Rockefeller also has an interesting way where he's going to go about this Panic of 1873, much like J.P. Morgan. So Rockefeller, remember his mantra, save when you can, not when you have to. So as these companies begin failing during this panic, he sends them money and buys them out. And these companies allow Standard Oil to grow. So this Panic of 1873 is very beneficial. Another company is beginning to fail. He's sending him a bunch of money that he has saved. He's going to buy off the company. Standard Oil continues to grow and grow and grow and grow. And again, he's using all this money that he's saving, hyper focus on costs, and he begins eliminating competition. Here's what's interesting. When he's buying all these companies up, he's not turning them into Standard Oil companies. What he does is he develops something called a trust or a holding company. These trust and holding companies are a massive monopoly, and it's a company that owns other companies. So if you guys think of like Darden, I think it's Darden Restaurants, and they own here locally in Evansville, they own things like Applebee's, and they own Red Lobster. And so these Darden Restaurants is very much like a holding company, kind of a larger trust-like thing. Of course, they don't have a monopoly, but it's something similar to that. So now let's look at the consumer's point of view and see how these trust and holding companies affected the marketplace. So let's say someone goes to Standard Oil and they don't like the service they got, or they don't like the oil, whatever the issue is, or they don't like Standard Oil and the practices they have. Well, they go to Trafigura Oil. Well, the thing is, Trafigura Oil started failing in '73 and Rockefeller bought them out. Now, they think they're going to Trafigura Oil, and when they buy from Trafigura, the thing is, Trafigura Oil is really Standard Oil, but working in Trafigura's name. McNeil Oil is really Standard Oil, but working in Standard Oil's and McNeil's name. Again, they don't like them. They're like, I'm trying to find someone who's not Standard Oil, and they go to Williams Oil Company. It's still Standard Oil. Or Rogel. Still Standard Oil. Ladies and gentlemen, so what he does, he buys out all these companies, lets them operate under their own names, but it's all Standard Oil. He is going to control 90% of the world's oil. Save when you can, not when you have to. Now, I'm going to let the cat out of the bag real quick. In 1911, we're going to enter this progressive era, and we're going to start breaking up these massive companies. In 1911, they're going to break up Standard Oil, and Standard Oil is going to be broken up into different states and different companies. And what you're going to see is, all those big oil companies from today, companies like Chevron, ExxonMobil, BP, and Marathon, they are all just fractions of Standard Oil. These massive oil companies are nothing what Standard Oil used to be. All right, ladies and gentlemen, let's jump into our last titan of industry. This is Andrew Carnegie, and he's going to focus on steel. Now, Andrew Carnegie is going to be well known for his vertical integration. Remember, we said vertical integration is owning all the factors of production, even to selling the product, and we talked about that in class. So he's going to be known for vertical integration. Carnegie is going to perfect a process that was actually developed in England, I believe, called the Bessemer process. And this Bessemer process is basically the Bessemer process is a new way in order to turn iron into steel. And what Carnegie does is he takes this Bessemer process and he makes his own Carnegie Steel Company, and he's going to make the steel for very cheap. Notice the correlations. Here's an associate from Carnegie. Here's what he said about Carnegie. Carnegie obsessed over cost. Carnegie never wanted to know the profits. He always wanted to know the cost. And you guys can kind of see those parallels. These are guys who are living in an era where there's not a huge focus on cost. There's a lot of waste, and these guys are kind of going against the stream. And you kind of see in this political cartoon, all these cartoons, we're seeing a little criticism starting to arise. People are also part of the cost. Wages are costs. So again, along with this discussion about where these industrialists stand, the cost of the laborer gets kind of lumped into this focus on keeping things at the minimum. And again, you can see in this political cartoon, these are all the industrialists are the logs and the fire, and who are they burning? They are burning the working man. And who's the working man strapped to? The monopoly, the trust, the holding company. It says, hopelessly bound to the stake. So pay attention. We're seeing this trend as this unit goes along. We're beginning to grow a movement to push. Okay, we're going to take a step further, and then we're going to bring this up again later. But just to kind of give a conclusion to this era, there is going to be a movement to break up these companies. And the movement is going to kind of end with this Antitrust Act, the Sherman Antitrust Act of 1890. And this is going to give the federal government power to break up these trusts. Now, it doesn't go the way that they're going to want it to go, but at least we see this movement in order to give the federal government a little bit more power to control the growth of these massive it's just, Boss Tweed, I love you. Oh, well, hello. Welcome to History at Home. Buckle up. Let's talk about political machines. When we talk about political machines, we're talking about political parties that are very disciplined. Usually the head of the political machines or bosses are controlling jobs, they're controlling votes, they're controlling elections, and these machines are going to depend on votes. And we know from class, we know that the urban areas are beginning to grow. They're being packed with particularly immigrants, and these immigrants are going to look for help in different ways, and political machines are going to be there to help them. And the problem is they're going to depend on their vote and require their vote in return, whether it is for food, whether it's for education, whether it's for a job. The political machines are going to help them, but they're doing this to maintain their vote. Now today, political machines are in every state and almost every city during this time, but today we're going to focus on one that is the best, and that is the Tweed Ring. The Tweed Ring is a political machine, and it's going to be led, the boss is a guy by the name of William Boss Tweed, or simply Boss Tweed, a gorgeous man. Look at that guy. Look at that guy. Is he hiding the turkey under there? He's so cute. I just want to pinch his cheeks. I love you, little Boss Tweed. I love you. Tammany Hall is the Democratic Party headquarters in New York City. And so the Democratic Party is typically called Tammany Hall in New York City. And it's, again, going to be controlled by Boss Tweed. Tweed is going to create probably the biggest and most powerful political machine that we have ever seen in our country's history. And so we have to ask, how does he do it? Now, we've already discussed that immigrants are starting to flock into the cities. These are the new immigrants that we've talked about from Eastern and Southern Europe primarily, and they are looking for jobs. They're looking for housing. They're looking for medical care. So I have a couple of quotes here that kind of shows you what the political machines are to these people. These are quotes from bosses and from Boss Tweed. So for instance, if they're looking for a job, I can always get a deserving man a job. And so again, what do they want? They want their votes. Boss Tweed said, if there's a fire in the 9th, 10th, or 11th Avenue, I'm usually there with my captains before the fire engines. And when he means his captains, the captains of the block in this political machine. And then he goes further and says, if someone is burned out of their house, I just get quarters for them. I buy them clothes. I fix them up until they're up and running again. So these political machines are providing this social safety net for the immigrants. But what do they want in return? Here's the best quote. All Tammany asked in exchange for its generosity was loyalty on election day, its philanthropy, but its politics too. Mighty good politics. The poor are the most grateful people in the world. And you can see how this can easily slide into corruption, because the votes for all the social services goes to Boss Tweed, and Boss Tweed is the one who's going to basically control New York for several years. And so votes equal power. These votes equal power. That's very, very important. The votes equal power. So if he can keep the people voting for him, it's equal to power. And to add on top of everything, there's rampant voter fraud that Tweed's going to commit, but a lot of these political machines are going to commit. Oh, this is a great quote. This is a Tammany captain who's going to take an immigrant out to vote, and we're going to see how they're going to use this voter fraud. Here's what he says. The most valuable voter grew beards before the balloting. When you voted them with their whiskers on, You take them to the barbershop and scrape off the chin. Then you vote them again with sideburns and a mustache. Then to the barber again. Off comes the sides, and then you vote them a third time with just the mustache. If that ain't enough, and the box can stand a few more ballots, clean off the mustache and vote them in plain face. That makes one of them good for 4 votes. And in some cases, voters could cast as many as 20 ballots. And they would go around. The craziest thing is they would go around and they would go around with these wagons, bring everybody in. They would buy them a beer and then go take them to a voting place. And they would go to a polling place, every few minutes. And so there's rampant voter fraud. But the thing is that these particular new immigrants, they're depending on them for these social safety nets. They could care less who's running, who's the mayor. They could care less, right? If they're providing social safety nets, they have this loyalty to the party. And what's best, in this case, Tammany Hall, the Democrats in New York, their operatives are the ones who counted the votes. And Tweed himself is on record saying the ballots made no result. Basically said the voting really didn't matter. The counters made the results. God, this is great. This is great. You kind of see that. We'll talk about some growing resistance to Tweed in a second, but this is a great political cartoon that really defines and what he means by this. This is by a guy named Thomas Nast. We'll look at him in a second. And he says, you can see at the bottom, that's what's the matter. And down there it says, as long as I count the votes, what are you going to do about it? And again, you look up at the political cartoon, you have the ballot there, and under the ballot, in counting, there is strength. So we're looking at rampant voter fraud. So when we look at Tweed's connections, this Tweed ring in Tammany Hall becomes very powerful, and Boss Tweed himself becomes very powerful, because as the boss, and he controls these votes, he controls also the patronage, he controls the spoils, he controls the votes for elected office, so he's the one who can motivate basically 1 million people go to vote, so you had to go to him. He appointed judges, so if you wanted to be a judge, who do you go to? He controls the city council. He was influential with the state government because he is the most powerful boss in the most powerful city right now. And he had the ability to appoint thousands of jobs. And so many people are looking to Tweed himself for the control. Right? We're seeing kind of a breakdown of the democratic process here, which is why we're talking about it in class. So if you were a railroad company and you wanted to extend the track to New York City, Tweed would say, pay me. And so you get a little money from the company. What about a new station in New York City? Pay me. If you were a merchant and you wanted to build a road to help your company, who do you have to go to? It's Boss Tweed. Pay me. You get your trash dumped. You want to control the trash collection. Got to go to Tweed. If you're a lawyer, you want to get your case in front of a judge. You got to go to Tweed. A banker, if a bank wants to be the one who lends the city money, guess who you got to go to? Tweed. He is connected in all this. Why? Because he controls the votes. He controls the counting. He controls the vote. He controls the patronage. He controls almost everything. And so he's making tons of money. So obviously people are not just taking this laying down. A very famous cartoonist, a guy by the name of Thomas Nast. He is a cartoonist for Harper's Weekly, and he becomes very, very influential in pushing back against Tweed. And so he becomes very critical through his political cartoons of Tweed and Tammany Hall and their corruption. And you can see, like for instance, this one, he's basically telling the people who are reading Harper's Weekly that his thumb is on New York. Right? Tweed's thumb is on New York, so Tweed controls New York. He's the one who brings up this voter fraud and is trying to educate people on the voter fraud. But when we look at the downfall of Tweed, the downfall of Tweed is actually not where you think it came from. It comes from the construction of New York City's courthouse at the time. And the New York City's courthouse just authorized $250,000 to build a brand new courthouse. Guess who they put in charge? Guess who they put in charge? So this $250,000, and of course they're going to put Tweed and his minions in charge of the production. They give him $250,000 to build, and then Tweed goes back and says, we need more money to complete the project. So they give him an extra $1 million, and then an extra $800,000, and then an extra $300,000, and an extra $300,000, an extra $500,000. And so by 1871, this construction project that was supposed to be $250,000 ended up being $13 million. And it wasn't even finished yet. That's what's so hilarious. It wasn't even finished yet, and he is milking basically the city for $13 million already. And so reformers begin asking some questions. Where did all the money go? And they start clamoring for an investigation. And you know what? To Tweed's credit, he says, you know what? We want an investigation too. We don't know where all the money went. And then he says, I'll run the investigation. He said he's going to run the investigation. And so it should be no surprise that during Tweed's investigation, no corruption is going to be found at all. And in order to print, this is a great thing, in order to print the investigation findings, it costs $6,000, which is an outrageous sum in paper costs to print the findings. And guess who owned the printing company? It's owned by Boss Tweed. It's this wonderful, I love him so much. Now, these people aren't stupid. Everybody knows there's a problem with this. And Thomas Nast, the guy who's starting to poke at Tweed a little bit, goes on he's on a mission, and he's a mission to expose Tweed and expose Tammany Hall, and he begins filling the pages every week of Harper's Weekly with political cartoons that are just killing Tweed. And the thing is, Tweed, of course, this is the 1870s, and Tweed is a massive man. He's well over 350 pounds, and so he's noticed. He's noticed because he's probably the fattest guy in the entire city. And so every time he prints him, everybody knows who he is, even the immigrants. And the thing is that many newspaper reports start funneling in. And we have more and more basic, Nast starts this push to investigate, and these newspaper reports begin finding fraud. So the New York Times prints out these purchases that Tweed made for the courthouse, and they put them into the New York Times. But the problem is, Tweed didn't care about what the New York Times said. Here's what he cared about. Here's his quote. I don't care a straw for your newspaper articles. My constituents don't know how to read. But they can't help seeing them damned pictures. So it's Thomas Nast that is starting to make this change, because remember, we've already said that those new immigrants coming in, they're not able to read English for the most part. They can see a cartoon and know the meaning of it. And Nast just keeps hitting them and hitting them and hitting them. And so by 1872, the votes, because Nast in the investigation, and it becomes clear that Tweed is taking advantage of the immigrants, the votes, instead of going to the Democrats, go to the Republicans. And remember how I said the votes equal power. This is going to strip Tweed of his power. And now this basically leaves him open for prosecution. And he's going to be prosecuted, and he's going to be sent to jail. Now, funny story, he escapes jail because he's going to pay off a jailer, and he escapes and he goes to Cuba. And they're going to use Nast cartoons of Tweed and give it to Cuban officials in order to find him. And they do, right? Because he is the largest man that most people have ever seen. This is great. So people are looking slowly to reform the problems of the cities. We talked about urbanization becoming an issue. We talked about the immigrants needing a lot of help. We talked about the political machines helping, and the political machines become so popular because of the social services that they begin to provide. And so we start seeing people, progressives, beginning to, one, draw attention to the problems, but for two, beginning to look to help kind of clean up the cities. One of the first people, and we're going to look at him again, a guy by the name of Jacob Riis, is going to basically print a series of articles which eventually is going to turn into a book called How the Other Half Lives. How the Other Half Lives is going to expose to everybody through these not only articles but pictures how these immigrants are living, because most of the people who are well-to-do are no longer living in these areas. They're no longer living close to these immigrants. So he begins exposing the real problems of immigration through his series of articles called How the Other Half Lives. And he is going to begin to inspire a movement to help fix some of the issues of the society at the time. And out of these cities comes another reform movement that is going to be inspired by religion. You guys remember how the Second Great Awakening inspired a reform movement of perfectionism. Out of the cities comes something called the social gospel movement. And the social gospel movement, in essence, says good works or service to the poor is how you reach salvation. Good works are the link to salvation. So in other words, service to the poor is how you're going to go to heaven. And the social gospel movement is going to be led by a guy by the name, created and led by a guy by the name of Washington Gladden. My congregants must play an active role in community life by attacking the immorality of their fellow citizens and government officials. So you see all that corruption, you see all that poverty, and he's pushing them to get to work and make change. The social gospel movement is very important. Again, what are we channeling? We're channeling that era of perfectionism from the early 1800s. So why are people going to these political machines? They're going to these political machines because they need social services. So out of the social gospel movement comes the settlement house movement. And the settlement house movement is a movement to create what is very similar to today's YMCA. They're going to create these settlement houses, and these settlement houses are going to provide services for the immigrants. Probably the most popular one is going to be in Chicago, a settlement house by the name of Hull House. It's going to be created by one of the leaders of the settlement house movement, Jane Addams. Jane Addams, the leader of the settlement house movement, is going to create the Hull House in Chicago, and these are going to be, again, these settlement houses are community centers that provide social services. These settlement houses will provide immigrants with education, child care, health care, not surprisingly, all the things that they need and that they were looking for these political machines for. So through this corruption, through all these problems, this poverty, there's coming a new movement, the settlement house movement, the social gospel movement, and it's a movement of people trying to change the cities. And through this movement, you're going to see this movement get larger and larger and become a national movement later. Ladies and gentlemen, that's it. Make sure you have your notes. Make sure you study because we'll see you next time.